We are officially in 2024, and I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, your list of resolutions has quitting vaping on it. Hello and welcome. My name is Andrew Cipriano. I'm a life coach who helps people quit their vices so they can raise their prices. It's pretty much a fun way of saying I help people who want to make a lot of money, who are entrepreneurially minded, stop doing things that aren't serving them. One of my resolutions for this year is to start making YouTube videos consistently, so that is why I'm making this, that's why you're here, so enjoy the content. Today's video, we're going to talk about the actual reason behind vaping to make sure that your mind and your body are aligned with quitting. A lot of people's aren't, and that's why they have so much trouble quitting. I'm gonna teach you some basic information about your brain, how it works, so you can leverage that information to quit vaping. And I'm gonna wrap it up by giving you some tools on how to actually be able to sit with cravings and keep your mindset on board with quitting. If you can do that, you'll quit for good. It won't be a big deal. But just keep in mind that the mental, emotional part is always more difficult to get in place than the actual physical addiction, which are all symptoms, okay? So let's get started. All right, so in order to beat nicotine addiction, you have to understand just a little bit about how your brain works so you can leverage that information for your own benefit and be able to quit for good, okay? It's not that we ever have a lack of control issue, it's that we have a lack of awareness issue. That's always the problem. So we're gonna start off by talking about your brain. In order to keep it very, very simple, I teach your brain has two parts, that's it. They're both slapped on top of each other, okay? They want different things. The brain that's making you addicted to nicotine is called your animal brain, okay? Your animal brain is the oldest part of your brain. You might have also heard people call it your mammal brain, your lizard brain. It's pretty much the oldest part that keeps your heart pumping and all of your unconscious behaviors going and all of your drives that are keeping us in survival mode, okay? Your animal brain only cares about one thing. This is called survival. So your animal brain only wants you to survive. And it does this with a system called the motivational triad. The motivational triad, I'm gonna put it up on the screen, has three parts: to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. All right, now when it comes to seeking pleasure, your animal brain uses dopamine. That's what happens when you vape, right? It releases dopamine. That's what makes it addictive. So in addition to seeking pleasure with dopamine, your animal brain really wants you to avoid any discomfort. And it's talking here about emotional and physical pain, okay? So it wants to avoid emotions like anxiety, fear, shame, guilt. It wants to avoid physical sensations like walking off a cliff, burning your hand, cutting your finger. That's how it avoids pain. Now, the third part of the motivational triad is to conserve energy, okay? And your brain does this by trying to keep you in as little movement and expenditure of calories as possible. That's why we all have a proclivity to be very lazy. So that's the animal brain, right? We all have this piece of our brain that wants to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. Now, the next part that you have is called your human brain, AKA the prefrontal cortex, okay? The prefrontal cortex is the part right behind your forehead, and it's the newest part of our brains that's developed, and the only animals that has a prefrontal cortex are human beings. It's the part of our brain that makes us human. That means it gives us the ability to abstract think, regulate our emotions, actually stop ourselves from overindulging in things, plan, make decisions, look into the future, look back into the past like no other animal can, okay? So again, these two brains, one wants survival, one wants higher level goals like owning a meaningful business, having a loving partner that's attractive and good for us and intelligent, and the other one just wants survival. Now these are both slapped right on top of each other, and that's where the problem comes from. Does it ever feel like you have two people in your head? One that sets a New Year's resolution that really wants to achieve it, and like you're on board and you're going for it, and then the other one comes in and he's like, screw it, it's Monday night, you had a hard day at work, go buy a vape, you've earned it. This is your brains in action. Remember, they're slapped right on top of each other, they want different things. Now, the beautiful thing about your brains, and this is the one thing that makes us human that other animals can't do, is that we can actually break out of our motivational triad. We can override the animal brain by learning how to use our prefrontal cortex. That is the skill set that any personal development class will teach you. It's the exact same skill set I'm going to teach you today to get you out of addiction for the last time. So when it comes to overriding your animal brain, you do this by one big mechanism: regulating your thoughts. This is a skill set called metacognition, which is a fancy word for saying that your brain can actually think about its own thoughts. No other animal can do that, and that's why we have the ability to do things like abstract think. We can actually do the metacognition and think about things that other animals that we are aware of can't, okay? Now, the beautiful thing about metacognition is it also lets us take control over that motivational triad, so we can actually override our brain's natural desire to be seeking dopamine all the time. Now, anybody who vapes knows that vaping feels really good. Why does vaping feel so good? It's not actually because of the nicotine, it's because the nicotine itself releases dopamine, the happiness and the motivational chemical in your brain, okay? So when you're vaping, you're not actually getting dopamine from the nicotine stick, you're just getting nicotine, and that triggers the dopamine in your brain to release, and that's what feels good. So it's an artificial substance that's triggering a natural chemical in our brain. Now, there's a couple of issues with this. One, nicotine is very addictive when it's vaped. The reason is because when it is in a vape format, there's something called nicotine salts in the vape. okay? Nicotine salts are pretty much a concentrated version of nicotine that are mixed with an acid. So that means that nicotine is a base, the salts are an acid. When you combine them, you turn off your body's natural defense mechanism to taking in too much nicotine, okay? So the vaping nicotine salts that most disposable vapes and most vapes these days have out there are very potent. They release a lot of dopamine, okay? Now the other issue is that vapes, when they're smoked in a vapor format, enter your brain and body very quickly, in as little as 10 seconds, even faster than traditional cigarette smoke. So that means that they're very addictive. Now, the reason that they're so addictive is because the likelihood that something will be addictive is based on two factors: the speed at which it releases dopamine and the intensity of the dopamine spike. So because vapes are so intensely strong with nicotine, release a lot of dopamine, and they're also very quick to eat in your body because of the vapor format of vaping, that means that they're incredibly addictive. So of course your brain wants this. Anything that releases dopamine, your animal brain thinks is important. Your animal brain also doesn't know that it lives in a society today with things like vapes and porn and sugar and flour. Your brain and my brain were designed at a time where abundance of dopamine was not a thing. And that system back 10,000 years ago worked exactly how it should have. But today, because something like a vapes exists, you're actually gonna have to override your animal brain's desire to seek dopamine, okay? So let's go back to it. You have two brains. One's always going to want you to vape because that feels good because it releases dopamine. The other one says, actually, hey, I don't think this is good for us. I think this is creating a lot more havoc in my life than helping me. So now we're going to learn how to take your human brain, the prefrontal cortex, and override the animal brain, okay? Again, this is a skill set called metacognition. Now we do this at questioning our thoughts. I know that sounds a little bit basic, but I really want you to take a minute and actually, if you're serious about quitting, I'd recommend that you pause the video and take a couple of minutes to write down all the reasons you vape. It's very important because a lot of the times we have belief systems in our head that are creating us to do things and we don't even realize those belief systems are there. If we want to quit vaping for good, we have to change our belief systems. Here's the reason why. Your thoughts create your emotions, which drive your actions and create results. That means that if you're vaping and you have the result of nicotine addiction, you have to change the thoughts that are creating those actions and results, okay? Your thoughts are always responsible for the results you have in your life. This is basic cognitive behavioral therapy, but it gets a little bit trickier than that. A lot of the times, people mistake their thoughts for being factual, okay? An example is that vaping helps with anxiety. A lot of people tell me that like it's a fact, but that actually is not a fact. That's an optional thought that isn't based in any reality. How do I know this? Because when you're addicted to something like a drug, when you release dopamine, it numbs your body. Numbing an emotion is not the same thing as processing it. In addition, nicotine addiction causes anxiety. The very function of addiction is to cause anxiety in your body when your body doesn't have the drug. That's exactly how an addiction works. So how is it possible that nicotine addiction could make you less anxious and more anxious at the same time? Well, it kind of does, because the anxiety it's creating, it's healing with the addiction when you use, but the existing anxiety that you started using vaping to deal with in the first place, it's not helping you with that. So overall, it's creating this whole big extra lump of anxiety, and it's only giving you a fraction of that back when you vape. That's the function of addiction. That's how addiction always makes your anxiety and your mental health worse. Because of the nature of addiction, it can't help your emotions. It's also not helping you with your mental health, okay? A lot of people believe thoughts like it helps with concentration, stress, all those kinds of things, and it really can't because it's an addiction, right? Anytime that we become physically and mentally addicted to something, it's creating more stress, more concentration issues, more anxiety, etc. So you really want to write down all the reasons that you're vaping, and you want to start to look at those with a lot of objectivity, okay? If you weren't you, and you were some random person on the street who had never seen nicotine, just ask yourself questions just like that. They'd probably walk up and be like, what do you mean it helps you with anxiety? Could you explain that to me? Could you please write out why you think that, or how it helps you, or explain the sensations in your body? And the whole point of this entire video is to build awareness, okay? Because we now know that there's two brains. One is always going to have you seeking pleasure and getting addicted to things. The other one can override that animal brain. But the main thing here is that you have to build awareness, because without awareness, you can't solve for the motivational triad. So we have to become aware of our thoughts. We have to become aware of our emotions in our body, and with that comes power, okay? So now we're gonna look at how a craving works. Now that you understand your thoughts, create your emotions, which drive your actions, we can look at how a craving works. It's very important, okay? So a craving happens with a trigger. So a trigger is something external that is totally objective. It means nothing. Now, after there's a trigger, we have a thought about it. Now, the thought has been conditioned into us. This is something that we've learned to condition over and over, that when this trigger appears in our life, we have a thought, okay? Now, the thought could sound like, vaping sounds really good right now. Now, when we have a thought, it creates an emotion in our bodies. Remember that your thoughts create your emotions. A craving is an emotion. A craving is just a vibration in your body caused by your thoughts. So when you have a thought that vaping looks really good after you see a trigger, maybe you're at school and somebody is in the parking lot vaping, that's a trigger, and then you have a thought about it. Vaping sounds really good, or that looks really interesting and yummy right now, right? What happens next is we create a craving in our body. That craving doesn't come from vaping. It comes from our thought about a trigger. Now what happens is that we have a craving and we usually respond by vaping. Now when we respond and we take the action of vaping because of a thought that looked good, we reinforce that vaping is good. Now there's two ways that you can change cravings, and this is ultimately the backbone of what I teach, okay? So really listen to this part, it's very important. You can either change the thought that's creating a craving, right? So there's a trigger, and instead of looking out at the parking lot and seeing that person with a vape and thinking that looks good, you just change it to, I don't need that, that really isn't who I'm becoming, something like that. That'll stop the craving from happening in your body altogether. Or you can just allow a craving to be there without responding to it. The more that you don't respond to your cravings, the more that you break the addiction. That's how it goes. Eventually, if you don't respond to your cravings for long enough, you'll no longer be chemically addicted. And then the only thing you have to worry about is your thoughts about vaping, okay? If you continue to think thoughts about vaping that make it look good and desirable, and it make you want it, then you're always gonna have to use willpower to fight your cravings and urges. I don't recommend doing this. The best way is to visualize a life without nicotine that looks way better than the one you're currently in, that's literally brought you to this video of addiction, okay? So spend some time visualizing what your life could actually be if there was no drama from addiction in it whatsoever. And then you wanna use the thoughts that come from that vision every single time you have a craving. Here's a trigger, my mom's smoking a cigarette. My thought, I don't wanna deal with that. I wanna be her age and not deal with that. That's one of the actual thoughts I started practicing that helped me quit vaping when my parents kept smoking cigarettes. So what I did, I just changed the thought in my head from that looks good to that's not what I want to deal with. That's a lot more suffering than it's worth. Okay, this is called managing your brain. And this is all about that skill set I mentioned earlier called metacognition. All we have to do is change our thoughts intentionally when we have a craving, and then to just change our beliefs about nicotine and vaping altogether and stop identifying ourselves as someone who uses it and enjoys it. And that might sound a little bit crazy and rudimentary, but you actually can get to that point. And once you get away from addiction and you distance yourself from it, all of the physical and chemical withdrawal symptoms, once you distance yourself, you will find that you actually enjoy your life better without it. It's kind of a funny thing. I started smoking when I was 16, and before that, I had never smoked before, right? So I had 16 years of life not being an addict, and then I had the next 9 years of my life being a nicotine addict. It's pretty remarkable, right? What happened was really cool. I thought I was always going to live a life where quitting vaping was suffering and that I wouldn't enjoy life as much. But after I removed myself from the addiction for about 2 months, and I could see clearly the life before nicotine addiction and the life after, my new life was better than both of them. Because now I knew that I chose not to addict myself to something, so I had a lot more self-confidence, and I knew how miserable my life was when I was vaping. So although it may seem kind of daunting to quit, I promise you, if you take control over your thoughts in your mind, and therefore the cravings in your body, and you choose to envision a life that's better, you will find that very quickly once you quit nicotine addiction, you will be living in one. So this is a basic introduction into the work I teach. I will be making a lot more videos talking about this. I have a whole bunch of content already in my bio. If you check out my bio, there's free resources, there's paid resources. I want to help you quit. I know how to do it. You just got to get to the root, which is always your thoughts and your emotions. If you cure for the root, the symptoms of vaping and addiction disappear. It is that simple. That's all you got to do. Because you have an animal brain that likes to avoid discomfort, you will be resistant to actually look at the thoughts that are creating your addiction. I promise you, but that's the work to do. If you want to quit vaping, you want to make it last, you want to self-respect yourself and know that I'm done and I mean it and actually get through it, you have to look at your thoughts and change them. That's all you got to do. You're going to be resistant to it. If you have any questions, comments, anything, please like, subscribe. I'm trying to get 2,000 followers. I would love that. And do whatever you got to do. But share this with somebody who needs it. I'll be making a lot more good content like this in the future.